Good morning. My name is Steve Cliff. I'm the Executive Officer of the California Air Resources Board, and I'm here on behalf of the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance's California presidency. On behalf of the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance, welcome. Established in 2018, the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance, or TDA, is a global collaboration of countries, cities, regions, and companies to accelerate the worldwide transformation to net zero emissions mobility before 2050. TDA members recognize that they cannot solve the complex challenge of building a cleaner global transport system individually. The enormity of the challenge and the urgency of the climate crisis require unprecedented cooperation across stakeholders, jurisdictions, and sectors, which is why our members and partners collaborated on the how-to guide we're launching today. Zero Emission Zones, Don't Wait to Start with Freight, offers a practical guide for how cities can reduce pollution, improve public health, make cities more livable, and grow the local economy. Tackling freight emissions by developing zero emission zones that target freight is a win-win for cities, regions, countries, and companies. With zero emission zones for urban freight, cities can jumpstart and accelerate the decarbonization of the trucking sector. In California, we recognize that the need for city-level action to meet our state climate goals, and we support their efforts on zero emission freight throughout state-level regulations designed to grow the zero emission truck market and enhance access to zero emission truck models that reduce costs for local businesses, clean up city air, and make those communities more livable. We encourage cities to work not only with local stakeholders, but also with their national and regional governments to ask for supportive policies that can empower their zero emission leadership. Let me turn it over to our panel of experts to give you the detail on the benefits of this work and examples from around the world. Verena?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you everybody here in the room and also for those who are joining online for taking the time to follow this launch. So I have the great pleasure of launching officially this new revised and updated version of the how-to guide, how to get zero emission freight solutions into place. Why is that so important? Well, the key message is there. Don't wait to start with freight. It's important to have that in cities. Why is it important? Because we all want to have improved living conditions in cities. And for improved living conditions, one of the issues we have to tackle is reducing the emissions of freight transport, which contributes with almost 30% to emissions in city. So this guide is a hands-on guideline. It helps you really to take first steps, second steps to make it happen. And what is important, it also shows that you get how to involve other partners, because nobody is able to turn around our transport system on their own, yet we all want to turn it around. So we need the cooperation of cities with countries, with regions, and as the TDA is the platform to facilitate this exchange and make it happen. And again, we want better quality, air quality in cities. And here is the guide of how to get those to there. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Karen van Kluzen, who has worked on the guide for Polis. Thank you.
Thank you, Verena. So it is indeed possible to achieve success, and you can start small, and you can also, as a small city as well as a big city, take steps and take action on freight. So as an illustration, let me tell you a bit more about the Polis Let's Surf project, which was supported by the Environmental Defense Fund, and it put the principles of the how-to guide into practice. It illustrates how local authorities can really develop a framework for green city logistics. And we explicitly partnered with small and medium-sized cities to show that regardless of size and geography, plans for zero emission zones on freight can achieve success. The 3 projects prepared the pathway for Aarhus in Denmark, Karditsa in Greece, and Ravenna in Italy to move forward. And the projects were very small, but very innovative as well. And they not only laid the foundations for those cities to move forward, but also for other cities to be inspired and replicate elements and apply them to their own local context. Aarhus, for example, studied the status of current logistics movement around their train station and then created a logistics plan for the area's redevelopment. Karditsa rolled out a pilot with local deliveries by e-bike, and Ravenna established a freight quality partnership as a permanent participatory tool. The project also showed once more the importance of partnerships, as Verena was already highlighting as well, as a key to success in tackling the adverse impacts of urban freight. For that reason, we are also, as Polis, which represents cities and regions, partnering with Alice, which represents the logistics sector, to see how together we can come to CO2-free city logistics by 2030. And an excellent example in that context is also the recently launched Green Deal by the Brussels Capital Region. So what they did with that Green Deal is have 50 companies active in the region, both SMEs as well as large enterprises, sign up to that Green Deal and together commit to taking action to decarbonize the urban freight sector. It's also it's also important to be aware that the adverse impact of urban freight transport are not limited to CO2, as was mentioned in the opening as well. So overall, both the mobility of people and goods also causes severe challenges linked to air and noise pollution, congestion, and road safety. But the good news is that zero emission urban freight intervention can also improve the overall livability of local communities in terms of cleaner air, public health, transport efficiency, pedestrian safety, and walkability, benefits to local business, etc. Now, including urban freight measures in sustainable urban mobility plans and developing dedicated sustainable urban logistics plans can help to approach related challenges in an integrated way and deliver on several policy goals. We also help cities to build and acquire the necessary skills, and we've developed a free online course as part of the SURF project to help cities include freight in city planning and also help them to design, implement, and enforce zero emission zones. Thank you. Handing over to my colleague.
Hi, everyone. Complementing Karen with a city network that has a global reach. ICLEI, it's clear, we heard it, cities have a clear vision, which is, of course, having livable cities. And livability, in fact, it's about air quality and being the local government, the level of government that is the closest to the citizen, having a good building environment is the most important. And in sister project of SURF, to a certain extent, the Ecologistics project, which is implemented in 3 different countries, in 9 different cities, in Colombia, Argentina, and India. We have helped 9 cities in developing their low carbon action plan for urban freight, indicating also the integrated approach already to the climate action components. And in that aspect, the cities has this vision already laid out in the sense that zero emission zones or low or near to zero emission zones are already part of the plans, but the timeline is to 2025, 2030. So that's why it's very important for us also to indicate and to work collaboratively with all these partners on indicating on how cities can work with other partners to make it possible, because they cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it alone as individual organizations as well. And to that extent, there are different challenges that have already partially also highlighted from the policy perspective, the resource and the staffing perspective, capacity, and also trust and collaboration across the board, the level of governments, but also with the private and public sectors. And in this particular context in which urban freight is also under the radar as a topic, cities in emerging economy have additional challenges, which are informality and also lack of national framework and funding to a certain extent. So on the good news, there are like good practices. So for instance, in another project called Solutions Plus, and this the best practices highlighted in the guide, Quito has managed to look into empowering also women by introducing also electric vehicles. And this is a policy that is complementing as well, like the initial zero emission zones pilots. And there are additional smaller pilots that needs to be scaled up, like in Bogota, Medellin, and Kochi as well. And I would encourage you to look at the guides, and so we don't only look at the what, but exactly on the why, and look at the practical elements. And I'm handing over to my colleague.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Rosemarie Cramer from the Netherlands government. And I'm actually very proud to sit here with a major part of the team with whom we have been working on the how-to guide. So it's very nice to finally meet in person after so many digital meetings working on the guide, and to be able to present it to you. I would like to talk about collaboration, because that is really the key to success in developing zero emission zones for freight. Collaboration, because there are so many stakeholders involved, so many stakeholders that will feel the impact of a zero emission zone for freight, but also all these stakeholders will be able to benefit from the zero emission zones for freight. So it's important to engage with your stakeholders from a very, very early moment in the process. And these stakeholders, they are of course the national and local governments, the companies, everything you see in the city center, the parcel delivery organizations, the larger fleet owners, even the OEMs. There are also parties who are very innovative. They come up with new logistics concepts. So it's important to keep them involved from a very early moment. In the Netherlands, we work on about 30 zero emission zones for freight. We start in 2025 by implementing that, which is very soon already. But back in the days in 2014, we had a Green Deal for zero emission freight in the city centers. And that was kind of a voluntary project where all the stakeholders, all the front-running stakeholders could work together in. They got the opportunity to do some pilots, to really gain experience with different ways to distribute, for different ways for city distribution. And all these pilots were meant to gain experience and to work together with each other, to learn. And we evaluated these pilots with all the stakeholders that were involved, and we improved it. And that is why we were able to say by law that we want to implement 30 zero emission zones for freight. So we start in 1.5 years, and as a national government, we have been trying to lead this process in certain parts of the process. So we are there for harmonization of the entry requirements for the vehicles, for example. We also support on enforcement, but we give the cities themselves the opportunity to really make sure that the zone has the borders that they would like to see, that they can make exceptions for certain vehicles, because every city has its own characteristics. So that requires a very close collaboration between local and national governments, and also with all the stakeholders. So again, collaboration is really the key to success. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemarie. My name is Henrik Gudmundsson. I'm from Concito, a climate policy think tank in Denmark. Zero emission zone, it's clearly a good idea that is getting traction, but it's also a fact that many cities are actually dependent on their national governments to provide legal framing and leverage to implement, enforce zero emission zones. And not everywhere things are working as smoothly as in the Netherlands, we hope. And an example we have in the guide is the city of Oslo in Norway, which is a very ambitious city in terms of climate policy. They want to go climate neutral in 2030. And transport is more than 50% of their emissions. So I have set up some quite ambitious goals for that. All vans in the city will be zero emission by 2030. All trucks will be zero emission or running on sustainable fuels by 2030, not just new, but all. That's the ambition and that's the goal. And to prepare for that, the city is developing a sustainable urban logistics plan, and zero emission zones is a key element in that wider plan. The original idea was back in 2020 was to introduce zones in 2 steps. First, a very small inner city area, which is almost car-free from 22 already. And then a wider area within the Ring Road 2 should be zero emission by 2026. But there was a caveat. They needed to ask the government if this was aligned with, for example, the National Road Traffic Act. And they asked the government back in 2020. And believe it or not, they still don't know. There is no clarification whether there is a legal framing for actually doing this. So the city has been forced to revise the original plan. So now the proposal is go right for the larger zone, start with urban freight in 25, and then go to passenger transport in 27. That's the current proposal, but they're still waiting. So it's kind of interesting to see how important this is. It's not a showstopper in terms of planning. The city is going forward, not waiting with freight. They're doing the planning, but it can be a showstopper for the implementation and create a lot of confusion. So this is just as a sort of a call to cities to join forces, actually, to push national governments for the required legislation. That's what we are trying to make cities in our country do right now, the 4 major cities. But also a call to ministers of transport gathered here at the ITF summit to help pave the way for those cities that want to go forward and make zero emission transport a reality in the urban areas where it's needed the most, and to provide the leverage for measures like zero emission zones. If not this year, at least next year's ITF summit, which is about greening transport. I've seen a proposal to discuss exactly this question of aligning governance between national and central agencies in transforming urban areas into zero emission transport. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a great point. I'm Sita Holtslag. I'm Europe Director for CALSTART, and I'd like to share with you a moment of remembrance I have. So in 2019, I was standing there. It was my first public presentation for the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance at the time, where we presented the first white paper on urban freight. And this was a time when urban freight was overlooked. People didn't really think about it. Transport in general was still a bit under the radar, but freight especially. And sitting here today presenting the second version of this how-to guide, I'm really proud. Like, there's still a lot to be done, but I'm really proud of all of you that this topic is now on the agenda. So I'd like to reflect a little bit on how important this is. So in the theory of change, where we're going to 100% zero emission by 2040 latest, for all modes of transport, not only in cities, but across the country, cities will be where it happens first. So focusing on cities and urban freight is very important, especially because sometimes they feel maybe they don't have that much impact, but the power that cities have to act as a multiplier, and this is a term I'm using from one of the colleagues of the MOU, is huge. So when a city imposes a zero emission zone, it doesn't just have an effect for that specific city. It really helps businesses think, hey, this is no longer something we could do in the future or we could pilot. We will not be able to enter the city. So this is going from like a sustainable hobby maybe sometimes to like pure business. And that opens up funding, that opens up possibilities. And that is a power the city really has to influence not only what happens in their city, but what happens in the entire country or across the globe. Because as companies are seeing these zero emission zones pop up, or even like the suspicion of that it may pop up, they have to strategize their global actions around that. So I'd really like to empower the cities on it's really having a ripple effect, what they're doing, recognizing it's not easy, but you don't need everyone to start. I think the red
thread I see through all the speeches is collaboration. Find those partners in your city that are ready to move and start and show that signal. This is where we're going. And that will have such a huge global effect. So with that, I think I'm the last speaker and I'll hand it back over to Jenny.
Thank you, Sita. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Helfrich. I'm with the University of California, Berkeley Center for Law, Energy and Environment. And I'm here today representing the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance California presidency. Thank you to our panelists for being here today and also for all the work that you've put into this how-to guide. And I'm going to help moderate a few questions. We want to open it up to questions from the audience here in the room and also online. We have a few online, so I'll give a moment for folks in the room to raise their hand if they want to. And if not, I'll go with one from online. All right, panelists, this task seems so large. Where can cities start?
Well, with freight, of course. As we heard, there is, as Sita said, there is a ripple effect. So it really doesn't matter too much where you start. The important thing is you need to start. And for really having a good start, you need to set targets. Where do you want to get to? That is definitely the first step. You have to agree that you want to do something and set a first target. Make it not too big, make it feasible, make it tangible, make it realizable. What you then need to do, of course, is you need to analyze where are you to understand how far you're away from that objective you want to realize. And then you can identify possible pathways. Then you can identify, and you should do that jointly with all stakeholders, because as we also heard during the discussion, this is a teamwork. It has to be a teamwork, and it will only be successful if it is planned and realized as a teamwork. And as we also heard, not only within the city, but reach out early enough to make sure that you do get the support on a wider level, like on the area and in the country, to make it successful and to make it happen. So have clear targets, identify where you are, identify possible pathways, and then take a first step. And the first step is the first step towards your objectives. You will get there, but take the first step.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to layer in on that one, Sita?
Maybe just repeating what has been said before. So this is a great resource, the guide. If you're more of a visual learner, the SURF e-learning course is really excellent, and it's online and it's free, and it really has a step-by-step approach on where to get started and how to go through those steps. So really joining networks like Polis or C40 or ICLE will help you access the wealth of information that's already out there. So I think if anything, that is a really good first step, I think, for cities to take.
Great. Another question we have coming in here is, how can cities work together? Which I think, Sita, you kind of just touched on. Yeah. Anybody want to elaborate on that, Karen?
Yes, indeed. It's through networks such as Polis, ICLE, C40, indeed, that we bring cities together to learn from each other's successes, but also mistakes. I mean, failures are very informative as well, and you can do it in a confidential environment. We have a dedicated urban freight working group where cities look at solutions, but where we also have this partnership with Alice, the logistics sector, to see how together with the companies, the logistics sector, we can come up with common solutions. So this networking, this cooperation, this peer-to-peer exchange is instrumental in feeling that you're not alone and that we are in this together and can move forward together. And we don't all have to be pioneers. There are people who are cities who are rather followers, but that's okay. I mean, we need both.
I think besides the city network, also the TDA has been very empowering. And in fact, besides also the peer-to-peer exchanges and the synergies that we can create across the projects, for instance, SURF and Ecologistics and Solutions Plus had an ecosystem as well of like exchanging best practices, for instance. There is also the component of the TDA that aligns countries, companies and cities, which enables and accelerates some of our actions as well. And and helps aligning with messaging. And I think that's where cities can also start, is like being open also about their successes, and that's where also the city networks are coming in, because sometimes they don't realize that they have good practices, and I mean, Quito is doing an amazing work, but then also Kochi in India has managed to create a freight committee, essentially, which is sometimes also rare to find in Europe. So that's, I think there is innovation across different regions, and there is potential for leapfrogging, both in north-north, but south-south, and to north-south as well.
Yes, one thing I would like to add, many cities have different sizes, and especially in the Netherlands, we don't really have any big cities actually, but we also have many, many small cities, and we see that smaller cities often don't have the capacity in terms of money, but especially in terms of workforce to dive deep into the steps to take for a zero emission zone, or for reducing the emissions from urban freight. So I would also therefore call on the larger cities to take the responsibility to involve the smaller cities near them, to involve them in your plans and to make sure that they can benefit your plans as well, which is also very beneficial, of course, for all the people working in the different cities, also in the smaller cities, that they don't face different rules and regulations in each city. So it's also a collaboration between larger and smaller cities.
Sure, I think Henrik wanted to go first.
Sorry. It was just to add that dimension of also collaborating across cities at the national level, because there are similarities in the context that they are facing in terms of legislation, in terms of statistics, in terms of language. So apart from the international collaboration, there's also a lot to gain to engage national organizations for local authorities, for example, and putting pressure. That's what we are trying to collaborate with right now here. But of course, the international side is key as well, because we can inspire each other across borders.
And Tumi, would you like to go?
In the guide, there is one example in which a large city is also influencing smaller cities, which is the case of Seoul. Seoul was driven by air pollution to implement a low emission zone. It's not a zero emission zone yet, but essentially they managed to expand it to the satellite cities around it. So essentially it's one example to of how the cities can scale up, and also how the larger city can influence the smaller cities. And in another project like the one in Oslo, in a project that different partners were involved, the city of Oslo managed also through procurement to influence to a certain extent the national government, and or at least inform some of the national government recommendations. And of course, the case of the Netherlands, it's groundbreaking.
Great, thank you, Tumi. Thank you, everybody. One of the questions coming in is, if national governments don't know where to start, how can they begin to enable this for cities? And Henrik, I feel like this relates to one of the steps that you like in the guide, which is clarifying regulatory powers. Do you want to start by answering?
Yeah, I think it is important to clarify the regulatory framework. I mean, not to wait with the planning, but to make sure that you can implement. And I would say start with a dialogue between local and national governments about it. Don't wait to involve and ask the government, but also don't wait for the response. This is really critical, and I'm again looking at the Netherlands. I wonder how you did it. I mean, to have sort of this kind of common agenda early on, it must help a lot, because there are so many issues, and it's not always clear in the beginning which one is a local issue and which one is a national issue, like provision of grid networks, and there are so many topics to discuss, and it could be such a rich forum for exchange if the central government can see that. But it requires that they have some courage and will let cities get some degree of freedom. Of course, things should be coordinated in an orderly fashion. We cannot have 20 cities doing completely different things. That could create a lot of chaos for the business. But to do it in an orderly and coordinated way, I think it requires ears and eyes from the government, and that's at least what they can do.
Karen, you want to layer on?
Yes, while it can be very empowering when national authorities indeed support local governments like is happening in the Netherlands, I would also encourage cities not to wait for their national governments if nothing is happening on that level. And unfortunately, that's something we still see quite often as well. But we see that sometimes cities are much more dynamic and progressive when it comes to pushing for action and innovation. And they hold many of the keys when it comes to climate action and decarbonization. So even if your national government isn't ready yet or is being influenced by other powers that play, let's say, such as industry, don't wait and just start yourself. You do have many competences on the local level that can make you take action also in the urban freight field.
And Sita.
Maybe something small to share and underpin what was said before. We are here at the International Transport Forum where the ministers of transport are here. I would like to stress that zero emission zones are sometimes confused with the general zero emission zones for the public. And of course, there is a behavioral change and an aspect of politics involved when you're talking about a zero emission zone for all. I would like to really underline the opportunity to focus just on freight within a zero emission zone and starting with freight players to make that happen, both because of the extreme benefits it has for the citizens, but also because you're dealing with businesses essentially and not with like citizens in a sense that, you know, they have a different kind of political playing field. So I'd really like to invite that discussion to really make that distinction between a zero emission zone blanket for everyone and starting with the freight aspect of that because of the benefits.
Verena.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, as you said, Sita, talking to businesses, there are so many companies who already have made huge efforts in greening their fleets. So I think you might even in many cases encounter open doors already because they make these efforts and they need a possibility to make their efforts visible and to make use of their efforts. So starting with freight, as Sita said, is really a step which might in many cases be much easier than trying to get entire zero emission zones in city, but start with that topic.
And I think we have a question here in the audience, John.
Hi, John Bozell with CALSTART. I wonder if you can talk about any of the documented benefits yet of zero emission zones that have been implemented. Have we been able to notice a significant increase in the number of zero emission trucks and vans deployed in those areas? So I heard a few anecdotal comments, but maybe elaborating a bit more on what's actually happened, what have we learned, and the positive outcomes from those areas where we've seen the zones implemented.
I start, I'm sure everybody on the board here on the panel can say something. Perhaps what I can start by looking a bit backwards. When about in 2010, I remember participating in a meeting where it was still discussed whether it is possible to use electric vans and trucks. Would it be possible to organize our freight transport system using that kind of vehicles? Nobody is opening such a discussion anymore. So I think, yes, it is possible and we have made enormous progress. I remember that about 5 years ago, the discussion, are there electric trucks, was still discussed. We have electric trucks, we have all sorts of electric trucks, and we have other zero emission systems for trucks. So yes, there is progress. It has been shown it's possible. There are more and more vehicles. There are still not enough vehicles, but yes, there is progress. So perhaps somebody of my colleagues would like to add to that.
Well, we don't have any documentation yet in the Netherlands, as we don't have the zero emission zones yet, because they will be implemented from 2025 onwards. But we see that many of the operators in the cities, they also travel between the cities, obviously. So it will have quite some impact on the areas outside of the cities as well. We often see that the central city center of a city is being chosen as a zero emission zone, but all the neighborhoods around it will profit as well. They will profit because, well, different logistics concepts will be used. So the larger trucks will be replaced by smaller vans, and the vans might be replaced by cargo bikes, and they will also be driving to the neighborhoods around the zero emission zone. And the vans will be traveling to the different cities. So it has actually quite some spin-off around the cities. And besides climate CO2 reduction, it also has many benefits like improved air quality, noise reduction, livability in the cities, job creation. So it really has a lot of spin-off to different topics and targets of a city and also of a national government. So no documentation yet, but we are very, very hopeful that the spin-off will be great.
Sita?
Maybe one opportunity I'd also like to share is how it can really empower the national subsidies, for example. So there's also examples there where the zero emission zone is in place and there's a transition period for certain trucks until 2030, but there's subsidies for the early adapters. So you get subsidies or incentives up until the regulation starts. And after that, you have to pay for it yourself. So it really encourages early market movers to purchase those trucks early. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening, for example, in cities of the Netherlands, where supermarket chains are also looking to purchase these very large trucks because they see the incentives are now I'm being helped. But if I wait, I won't have the experience, but I also have to pay for it myself. So I think there's that multiplier effect where if coordinated well with a national level and other incentives, zero emission zones can really help accelerate in a very, very focused way.
That's a great point. Tumi?
So I can echo the fact that we don't have the data yet, especially on the quantitative part. And especially in the cities where we are more active, which are in the emerging economies or global south. But what some of the cities have recorded is more about the air pollution. And also because the starting point is different than the disaggregated different type of freight providers essentially were disaggregated before. So even having this convening mechanisms and having working groups within the cities on these topics, it's one step forward. And at the same time, in some of the cities, the informality is a big element, and therefore even having this type of stakeholders at the table and being able to influence the policies or having this open dialogue is an achievement. So more on the softer approaches, but definitely when we bring in some of the best practices from other cities, and there are businesses that are indicating, oh, because the city has implemented zero emission zones or low emission zones, then they felt the business opportunity. But then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, they would like to also have a clarity in policies and equal level playing field, because then they can also invest more in this type of vehicles.
I really like that point, Tumi. We've talked a lot at this summit about how decarbonizing transportation is really about learning how to speak and reach across sectors and break down silos. And I like that zero emission zones are a way to start that at a local level. I think we have another question here in the audience. Ed?
Ed Thompson from Scottish Government. I think the climate change and air quality benefits of zero emission zones are really persuasive. And there will be a lot of companies who are very enthusiastic about making the change. But there'll be others who understand the collective benefits, but at the level of their own individual company or operations will be very concerned about disruption and the challenges that poses to their business. Does the panel have any reflections or examples of best practice on how to acknowledge those kinds of concerns and handle them and help make the overall transition amongst that business community in local areas as smooth as possible?
Verena?
Yeah, as you said, many corporates are already making huge efforts and are very successful in shifting to zero emission vehicles. These are usually big corporates because they have the resources. And I think the biggest challenges are for small and medium-sized companies where there is perhaps one vehicle, but there are many of those with one vehicle, or a few vehicles, and where the resources are very, very limited. So plus there are often companies or organizations who buy their vehicles as used vehicles, not new, because it's an investment and the resources are not there to buy such a vehicle. So what to do about it? One is, of course, already being aware of it and being aware that these groups need support, and finding ways to support them, encouraging, as we are moving on, there will be also a market for used vehicles. Here, it's also, I think, important. We had yesterday a workshop on how could this transition be financed, and as it was mentioned also during that workshop, it is also a call to OEMs, to vehicle manufacturers, to contribute to developing transparency on a used vehicle market, so that smaller companies can see what is coming their way, what can they expect. That's one opportunity, one possibility from the OEM side. Cities can really develop plans how to support small and medium-sized corporates. And then I think platforms are like Polis or Alice or other platforms, and there are many of those who support the transition. They can provide support by information on those kind of vehicles, on the secondhand market. And these are the points where I see where development is needed. Also, what cities can do is they can contribute infrastructure which can be shared. So it's not in the charge of every small, medium-sized company to buy and install the necessary infrastructure. So developing charging points, information on charging points, is also another important step. So I think the different players, again, have to work together, but already developing this awareness where the issues are and making sure that these groups are approached, supported, and covered in measures which help the transition is key for making it a success.
Thank you, Verena. So we've been given our 2-minute warning, and I think Tumi and Karen would like to go real quick. Tumi, you want to go first?
Thank you. To complement what Verena was saying, in one of our projects, we have co-designed actually the pilot projects with the companies, so along with the city as well. So essentially, in Bogota, for instance, we piloted a consolidation center in which we engaged also the startups, and that was a good way to also start to build the trust in a small environment, a controlled environment, but also having shared data and having also some small set of data to understand also what is the impact. I'm not saying that's perfect, but what I'm saying is that it's an iterative process, and we can learn from these experiences because you need to test it on the ground. And then in India, we had introduced some 2- and 3-wheelers because the cost of the e-wheelers are E2- 3-wheelers are much higher, in collaboration with the city that co-funded with the charging infrastructure, and with the proof of concept, some of this private sector has also adopted these fleets and vehicles, so that there is an opportunity also for public-private partnerships.
Thank you, Tumi. Karen, real brief.
So the Brussels Green Deal that I referred to earlier, with this group of 50 companies, big and small, committing to action with very concrete action points, also includes financial support from the Brussels region to fund a number of those local actions. So that's also a way for smaller companies to make a difference and get support for that and be recognized for that. Also, indeed, consolidation centers are a way to bundle goods and to also support smaller businesses in bringing goods together and to pool resources. And finally, what we also see is that more and more cities are supporting local retail in competing with e-commerce by setting up a local digital platform, for example, where also those shops can offer their services in a digital environment and help them, thrive and compete with the big players on the global level.
Great. Thank you, Karen. So I think one of the things we've learned today is there are a lot of benefits, but there's also a lot of ways to start. There's no one way to do this. And the how-to guide can help any city or national government or company take the first steps. So thanks again to our panel of experts. And on behalf of the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance, thanks to our audience for joining us today.